What's actually next for Artemis? The moon can wait. Before anyone walks on the moon, a crew has to rehearse in Earth orbit. By Physics Explained. In April, people flew around the moon. It's worth sitting with that for a second, because we've gotten so used to the idea of going back that the actual going back slipped by almost quietly. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canada's Jeremy Hansen spent about 10 days aboard NASA's Orion capsule, looped around the far side, and splashed down in the Pacific on April 10th. It was the first time humans had traveled to the moon in more than half a century, since Apollo 17 packed up and left in December 1972. If you're reading this, you're already my kind of audience. I write here on Substack, post companion videos on YouTube, and also share episodes through my podcast. Subscribing is the easiest way to support the work. And if you're able to pledge, it makes a real difference. So the natural next question is the obvious one. When do we land? There's a phrase that keeps turning up in the coverage, and it slides right past most readers. The astronauts will dock with commercial landers. It sounds like a throwaway detail. It's actually the whole story of how America gets back to the moon, and it's the part worth slowing down on. Enjoying this? I cover space and physics in plain language over on YouTube too. Subscribe here, YouTube. NASA buys its biggest machines in two completely different ways. The old way is the way you'd imagine. NASA decides exactly what it wants, writes the detailed specifications, and stays in the room for the engineering decisions. The contractor builds to NASA's direction. NASA pays whatever it ends up costing, plus a guaranteed fee on top, and owns the finished vehicle. And if the bill comes in billions over, which it usually does, the taxpayer covers it. This is how Apollo was built, and it's how the giant SLS rocket and the Orion capsule are built today. The new way flips that on its head. Instead of buying a machine, NASA buys an outcome. Deliver our astronauts to the surface and bring them home. It picks a couple of companies, agrees on a fixed price, and pays out only as each one hits an agreed milestone. The company designs the vehicle, builds it, owns it, and can rent it out to other customers too. If development runs over budget, that's the company's problem, not NASA's. Here's the kicker. The rocket and the capsule that carry the crew to lunar orbit are built the old way, and they're exactly the parts famous for going over budget. But the lander, the thing that actually touches the moon, is bought in a new way. NASA doesn't own a moon lander. It's hired SpaceX and Blue Origin to bring their own. And they really are their own. If NASA were drawing the plans, the two landers would look like cousins. Instead, they look nothing alike. SpaceX's Starship is a 50-meter stainless steel tower that has to be refueled in orbit, while Blue Origin's Blue Moon is a squat lander barely a third its height. Each company made its own bets to answer the same question. Why hand off the single most dangerous, never-been-done part of the trip? Because it's cheaper, because competition between two companies keeps everyone honest. And because NASA already proved the model works, it's been buying rides to the space station from private companies for years. The lander is just that idea aimed at the moon. The catch, of course, is that you're now betting the whole mission on hardware that two private companies haven't finished yet, which is exactly why the next Artemis flight isn't a landing at all. It's a rehearsal to find out whether those landers are real. It's not that NASA couldn't build a moon lander itself. It did exactly that during Apollo. The lunar module was a government-directed, contractor-built vehicle in the old cost-plus mold. So it's technically possible. The problem is that it's no longer affordable the old way, given two things that have changed since Apollo: the budget and the ambition. The budget is the blunt part. At its peak in the mid-1960s, NASA consumed something like 4% of the entire federal budget, an extraordinary, war-footing level of spending that let it build everything bespoke and fast. Today, NASA runs on roughly 0.5% of the federal budget. You cannot reproduce Apollo's build everything in-house model on a fraction of Apollo's share of national resources. Something has to give. It's worth knowing that this is all unfolding under real budget pressure. The Trump administration's FY 2026 request proposed the largest single-year cut in NASA's history, slicing total funding by nearly a quarter and gutting the agency's science programs by 47%, enough to kill more than 40 active and planned missions. Congress rejected it. In January 2026, lawmakers funded NASA at $24.4 billion and preserved science, spending almost entirely, in a bipartisan rebuke. But the administration came right back, reviving nearly identical cuts in its FY 2027 request. So the fight isn't over. It's recurring, and the pattern underneath it is telling. The cuts target robotic science, meaning planetary probes, telescopes, and Earth observation, while the Moon program is the priority being funded. Within a shrinking NASA, human exploration is winning, and space science is losing, which is exactly why leaning on privately built landers is so appealing. When money is this tight and getting tighter, the commercial model isn't just convenient. It's how an ambitious Moon and Mars program stays alive at all. The plan everyone expected. For years, the script was simple. Artemis I, 2022, was an uncrewed test flight. Artemis II would carry a crew around the Moon. And Artemis III would be the big one, boots on the lunar surface, the first woman and the next man, a triumphant sequel to Apollo. Then, in late February, NASA tore up that third act. Administrator Jared Isaacman stood up and announced that Artemis III would no longer attempt a landing at all. The mission that was supposed to be humanity's return to the lunar surface had been quietly rewritten into something far more modest. A flight that never leaves the neighborhood of Earth. If you only read the headline, it sounds like a retreat. It's more complicated and more sensible than that. NASA's real problem was rhythm. The SLS rocket and Orion capsule work, but they fly rarely, historically once every 3 years or more. It's hard to get good at something you do that infrequently. Each mission becomes a high-stakes event rather than a routine, and the gaps mean teams half relearn the job every time. That's the context for Isaacman's call. Going straight from a flyby on Artemis II to a full landing on the old Artemis III was, he said, too big a jump. The list of things that had never been done with a crew aboard was long. Docking Orion to a lunar lander, transferring into that lander, and riding a brand new commercial spacecraft down to the surface and back. Folding all of that into one mission, after a multi-year wait, was asking a lot. What comes next? If Artemis III is the practice run, the landing itself moves to Artemis IV, now set for no earlier than 2028. That's the mission that will do what Artemis III was originally meant to do: put astronauts back on the surface. NASA wants more than one. The plan is 2 landing missions in 2028, Artemis IV and Artemis V, followed by roughly 1 mission a year after that. The reasoning behind the whole reshuffle is frequency. Launch more often, change less between flights, and turn a once-a-decade event into something closer to routine. NASA has talked about getting the gap between launches down to about 10 months. There's logic to that. A program that flies regularly keeps its skills sharp. One that flies once every few years has to relearn the job each time. The point isn't to visit. It's to stay. The landings are not the real goal. They're the start of something larger, a permanent base near the Moon's south pole. A December 2025 executive order told NASA to land people on the Moon by 2028 and stand up the first pieces of a permanent lunar outpost by 2030. And in March 2026, NASA released its plan to do it. The work has already started, before anyone has landed. NASA has begun ordering the hardware, awarding hundreds of millions of dollars to 4 companies for landers, rovers, and drones. Blue Origin will deliver moon buggies built by Astrolab and Lunar Outpost, and Firefly Aerospace will deliver the first drones, all of it meant to arrive near the South Pole before the first crew lands in 2028. A second phase, from 2029 into the early 2030s, would build up the permanent infrastructure, including a power grid. The South Pole is the target for one reason: water ice, which has been collecting in its permanently shadowed craters for billions of years. Ice means drinking water, breathable oxygen, and rocket fuel that doesn't have to be hauled up from Earth. But those same shadows are a problem. Stretches of darkness at the pole can last for months, which rules out solar power, so the base will need radioisotope sources and eventually a nuclear reactor to survive them. Much of that hardware, down to power cables rated for lunar radiation, doesn't exist yet. One quieter change came with the shift in focus. NASA intends to pause work on Gateway, the small station it had planned to keep in orbit around the Moon, and put the effort into the surface instead. And the base isn't only about science. Underlying the rush is concern in Congress and the administration about rivals. China and Russia are developing their own lunar outpost, and a summary of one Senate bill calls for a U.S. base, so we can get there before the Chinese, and to dominate the moon, control strategic terrain in space, and write the rules of the 21st century. What NASA says less loudly. Course correction is the phrase you use when the original course wasn't working. Artemis is nearly a decade old and has run years late and billions over budget. Artemis 2 slipped repeatedly, and engineers spent the run-up chasing technical problems, including a helium leak that NASA now plans to fix by replacing an entire upper stage of the rocket. Adding a mission does lower the risk of the eventual landing. It also buys time for hardware that wasn't going to be ready for a 2027 landing anyway. That hardware is the landers. Both still have a lot to prove. SpaceX's Starship has to be refueled in orbit by a series of tanker launches, a maneuver no one has ever performed, and it has yet to reach orbit at all. Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, which will carry its lander, has only flown a handful of times. Testing them in Earth orbit first is, among other things, a way to find out whether they're real before NASA commits a moon landing to them. What's next isn't really about the moon. NASA's stated logic has long been that the moon is a stepping stone to Mars, a place to learn how to live off-world and to mine ice for fuel before the longer trip. The executive order that set the 2028 landing and the 2030 base also tells NASA to lay the groundwork for Mars. The connection is sharper than the official language suggests, because the lander NASA chose is itself a Mars vehicle. Starship is the ship Elon Musk is building to reach Mars, and he has never pretended otherwise. He has called the moon a distraction and Artemis a jobs program, and said he'd rather go straight to Mars. When NASA bought a commercial lander, it tied part of its moon program to a contractor whose real ambition lies well beyond it. This is where it gets genuinely contested. The administration's budget proposed canceling SLS and Orion, the expensive government hardware, after just 2 crewed flights. Musk and the president have pushed Mars as the national priority. Isaacman tries to hold both, calling SLS outrageously expensive while insisting NASA doesn't have to choose between the moon and Mars. What keeps the moon in first place is the race with China, which is aiming to land its own astronauts by 2030. So the commercial bet and the Mars bet turn out to be the same bet, wearing different clothes. If the landers are private and reusable, NASA can eventually lean on them and shed the costly rocket, which is exactly what the Mars camp wants. The redesigned Artemis 3, testing those landers in orbit, is the moment where the moon program and the Mars ambition quietly touch. What to watch? NASA named the Artemis 3 crew on Tuesday, June 9, 2026, from Johnson Space Center in Houston. Randy Bresnik will command the mission, with ESA's Luca Parmitano as pilot and Andre Douglas and Frank Rubio as mission specialists. Bob Hines was named as the backup crew member. For now, what's next isn't a boot print in the dust. It's 2 spacecraft meeting in Earth orbit while a crew checks that the hatches line up, the suits hold, and the systems talk to each other. It's a less dramatic answer than a landing, but it's the step that decides whether the landing happens at all. If you want to understand what's actually happening in spaceflight, explained in plain language, without the press release gloss, consider subscribing, and if you can, a pledge helps me dedicate more time to writing and keep the blog going. If you're reading this, you're already my kind of audience. I write here on Substack and post companion videos on YouTube, and also share episodes through my podcast. Subscribing is the easiest way to support the work. And if you're able to pledge, it makes a real difference.